In the vast, open spaces of Montana, where the mountains meet the sky and the wind carries whispers of forgotten dreams, one woman's journey would challenge everything a small town thought it knew about beauty. Eleanor Walsh stepped off the train, in Pinecrest, with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of hope. Standing at 5'4" and weighing considerably more than the local women, she immediately became the subject of cruel whispers and sideways glances. They said she had deceived Thomas Holloway with her letters and photographs. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. They said a man like him deserved better. What they didn't know was that Eleanor possessed something far more valuable than conventional beauty, a spirit that could tame the wildest lands and heal the most wounded heart. This is the story of how one woman's courage transformed not just a man's life, but an entire community's understanding of what true beauty really means. April 1892 arrived with a vengeance in Pinecrest, Montana. Winter had refused to release its grip, and snowflakes danced in the bitter wind as the northwestern Pacific chugged into the station. Thomas Holloway pulled his worn leather coat tighter around his broad shoulders and stamped his boots against the wooden platform. His ranch hands, Jackson and Everett, stood nearby, exchanging knowing glances. "You sure about this, Tom?" Jackson asked, his weathered face creased with concern. "Mail-order bride's a mighty big gamble." Thomas ran a calloused hand through his sandy hair. At 35, he was considered a confirmed bachelor by Pinecrest standards. 10 years running his father's ranch alone had hardened him, but the endless cycle of dawn to dusk labor without companionship had finally worn him down. "I'm sure about being done with eating my own cooking," Thomas replied with a half-smile that didn't reach his grey eyes. "And the Evans sisters have made it perfectly clear none of the local girls are willing to live 20 miles from town." The train whistle pierced the frigid air as the massive iron beast groaned to a halt. Thomas straightened his collar and brushed the dust from his sleeves. 6 months of letters with Eleanor Walsh had revealed a sharp mind and gentle spirit. Her photograph showed a woman with kind eyes and a sweet smile. It was enough, he decided. Life on the frontier demanded practicality above all else. The passenger door swung open, and a conductor helped a woman down the steps. Thomas felt his breath catch in his throat. The woman who stood before him was not the slender figure he had imagined from the single photograph she had sent, a carefully posed portrait showing only her face and shoulders. Eleanor Walsh was a full-figured woman, her blue traveling dress stretched across ample curves, her cheeks round and flushed from the journey. He heard Jackson's barely suppressed snort and felt a flash of anger toward his friend, but doubt had already crept in, wrapping cold fingers around his heart. Had she deliberately misled him? Eleanor's eyes scanned the platform anxiously until they landed on Thomas. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by a tentative smile that transformed her features. She clutched her small valise with gloved hands and made her way toward him, her steps hesitant but determined. "Mr. Holloway?" Her voice was soft, with the refined Eastern accent she had mentioned in her letters. Thomas removed his hat. "Miss Walsh." An awkward silence stretched between them, filled only by the hiss of the train and the murmurs of the gathering crowd. Pinecrest was small enough that a new arrival, especially one meant for Thomas Holloway, was cause for attention. "Well," Everett finally said, stepping forward to take her bag, "welcome to Montana, ma'am. Hope you like your skies big and your winters bigger." Eleanor's smile widened with gratitude at the friendly gesture. "Thank you, Mr. Just Everett, ma'am. Been working for Tom here since we were boys." He tipped his hat. "This here's Jackson, best horse trainer in 3 counties. Though don't tell him I said so." Jackson nodded curtly, his expression unreadable. "We should get going," Thomas said, more abruptly than he'd intended. Storm's coming in, and it's a long ride to the ranch. Eleanor's face fell slightly, but she straightened her shoulders. Of course, I'm eager to see my new home. As they walked toward the wagon, whispers followed them like shadows. Did you see the size of her? Poor Thomas, though he was getting a wife, ended up with two. She'll eat him out of house and home before winter's over. Colour flooded Eleanor's cheeks, but she kept her chin high and her eyes forward. Thomas felt a flicker of admiration at her composure, despite the sinking realization that this arrangement might be a terrible mistake. The ride to the Holloway Ranch was painfully silent. Eleanor sat beside Thomas on the wagon bench, while Everett and Jackson rode behind on horseback. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, winter brown and dotted, with patches of stubborn snow. It's beautiful, Eleanor said quietly, breaking the silence. I've never seen so much space. Thomas glanced at her profile. Her auburn hair was pinned neatly beneath a practical bonnet, and her green eyes reflected the vast Montana sky. Despite his disappointment, he couldn't deny she had a lovely face. Gets lonely, he replied, especially in winter when the snow cuts you off from town for weeks at a time. Most Eastern women can't stomach it. I'm not most Eastern women, Mr. Holloway. There was steel beneath her gentle tone that caught Thomas off guard. For a moment, he glimpsed the woman from the letters, intelligent, determined, unafraid of hard work. We'll see, was all he said. The Holloway Ranch came into view as they crested a rolling hill. The main house was solid and well built, with a wide porch and chimney smoke curling against the grey sky. Nearby stood a barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings, a small herd of cattle huddled in a sheltered paddock. It's not much compared to Philadelphia, Thomas said, watching her reaction carefully. Eleanor's eyes shone with something he couldn't identify. It's a home, she said simply. Something I haven't had in a very long time. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Thomas had known from her letters that Eleanor was alone in the world, orphaned in her teens and living with a distant cousin who had made it clear her presence was unwelcome. But he hadn't considered what this new start might mean to her, beyond the practical arrangement it was for him. As they pulled up to the house, a large woman with silver-streaked hair emerged onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Bennett, Thomas called. This is Miss Walsh. The housekeeper's eyebrows rose slightly at the sight of Eleanor, but she offered a warm smile. About time this house had a proper mistress. Come in, child. You must be frozen to the bone. The interior of the Holloway home was surprisingly comfortable. Sturdy furniture, clean floors, and a blazing fire in the stone hearth gave evidence of care and attention. Yet there was a bareness to it, no decorative touches, no feminine influence. It was a house maintained for function, not comfort. I'll show you to your room, Mrs. Bennett said, leading Eleanor up a narrow staircase. Mr. Holloway had me prepare the guest bedroom. After the wedding, of course, you'll move to the master suite. Eleanor's cheeks coloured again, but she followed, without comment. Left alone in the parlour, Thomas removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair. The weight of what he'd done, bringing a stranger to his home with the expectation of marriage, suddenly felt overwhelming. She wasn't what he'd expected, not just her size, though he couldn't deny that had shocked him, but something else. Something in her eyes that spoke of depths he hadn't anticipated. Mrs. Bennett returned, her expression stern. She's freshening up. Poor girl's exhausted. She's not what she appeared to be in her photograph, Thomas said flatly. And you've never adjusted a truth to appear more favourable? Mrs. Bennett sniffed. Judge her by what she does, Thomas Holloway, not how she looks. Your mother taught you better than that. Thomas had the grace to look ashamed. His mother, God rest her soul, would indeed have been disappointed in his reaction. The weddings, in 2 weeks. he said instead. "Pastor Miller's coming out to perform the ceremony." "And if you decide against it?" Mrs. Bennet asked sharply. Thomas shrugged uncomfortably. "Train goes back east twice a week. That girl didn't travel 2,000 miles to be sent back like damaged goods," Mrs. Bennet hissed. "She deserves a chance, same as anyone." Before Thomas could respond, Eleanor appeared at the doorway. She had removed her travelling clothes and now wore a simple blue dress that, while modest, did little to disguise her full figure. Her hair was freed from its pins, falling in auburn waves past her shoulders. "Mrs. Bennet mentioned supper would be ready soon," she said. "I was hoping I might help." "No need," Thomas replied. "Mrs. Bennet manages the cooking." "Actually," the housekeeper interjected with a pointed look at Thomas, "an extra pair of hands would be most welcome. Come along, Miss Walsh. We can get acquainted over peeling potatoes." As the women disappeared into the kitchen, Thomas heard Eleanor ask about preserves and whether the ranch grew its own vegetables. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A domestic conversation that should have reassured him, but instead deepened his unease. What had he been expecting? A delicate ornament to beautify his home? He'd specifically written that he needed a practical woman, someone who understood hard work. Supper was an uncomfortable affair. Jackson and Everett joined them, along with 2 other ranch hands, Samuel, an older man with a perpetual squint, and Nate, barely 20, with a shock of red hair. The men were awkwardly polite, stealing glances at Eleanor when they thought no one was looking. The food, however, was excellent. Roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Eleanor ate modestly despite the cruel whispers at the train station that had implied otherwise. She asked intelligent questions about the ranch, the size of the herd, the challenges of the previous winter, plans for the spring calving. "You seem to know something about ranching, Miss Walsh," Samuel observed. Eleanor smiled. "My uncle had a small farm in Pennsylvania. Nothing like this, of course, but I learned the rhythm of agricultural life." She hesitated. "I also read extensively. Mr. Holloway mentioned his difficulties with blue tongue disease last season, so I obtained some veterinary texts." Thomas looked up sharply. "You studied veterinary medicine?" "Hardly," Eleanor replied. "But knowledge is never wasted, and I thought it might be useful." She met his gaze steadily. "I take my responsibilities seriously, Mr. Holloway." After dinner, the men retreated to the bunkhouse, leaving Thomas, Eleanor, and Mrs. Bennet in uncomfortable silence. "I imagine you'd like to rest," Thomas finally said. "We rise early here." "Of course." Eleanor stood, smoothing her skirts. "Good night, Mr. Holloway. Mrs. Bennet." Once she had gone upstairs, Mrs. Bennet fixed Thomas with a stern glare. "You've barely said 10 words to the girl all evening." "What exactly am I supposed to say?" Thomas demanded. "She's not what I expected." "And what did you expect? Some fragile city girl who'd wilt at the first sign of hardship?" "You need a partner." "Thomas, not a porcelain doll. I need honesty," he countered. "She misrepresented herself." Mrs. Bennet shook her head in disgust. "And I suppose your letters mentioned your stubborn pride and that temper of yours? Or how do you work yourself half to death rather than face the emptiness of this house at night?" She gathered the remaining dishes. "Give her a chance, Thomas. That's all I'm saying." The next morning it dawned clear and cold. Thomas rose before sunrise, as was his habit, and was surprised to find the kitchen fire already lit and coffee brewing. Eleanor stood at the stove, her hair braided down her back, wearing a practical work dress and apron. "Good morning, Mr. Holloway," she said. "Mrs. Bennet mentioned you take coffee before heading to the barn. I hope you don't mind that I prepared it." Thomas accepted the steaming cup wordlessly, taken aback by her early rising. Most city women, in his experience, preferred leisurely mornings. "There are eggs and bacon keeping warm," she continued, seemingly undeterred by his silence. "And I've packed provisions for your noon meal." She gestured to a cloth-wrapped package on the table. "That's Mrs. Bennet's job," he said. Eleanor's smile faltered slightly. "Mrs. Bennet mentioned her arthritis troubles her in the mornings. I thought I might ease her burden." She hesitated. "Unless you object?" Thomas felt a twinge of shame at her consideration for the housekeeper. "No objection," he muttered. Then added awkwardly, "Thank you." The day passed in a blur of ranch work, mending fences damaged in the recent storms, checking on pregnant heifers, and repairing a leak in the barn roof. Thomas deliberately stayed away from the house, unsure how to navigate this new dynamic. When he finally returned at dusk, he was greeted by the unexpected sight of warm light spilling from every window and the smell of fresh bread in the air. Inside, the house had undergone a subtle transformation. Nothing had moved, yet everything felt different. A vase of early spring wildflowers sat on the dining table. The floors gleamed with fresh polish. The heavy curtains had been washed and rehung, allowing more light into the once gloomy parlor. "Your Miss Walsh has been busy," Mrs. Bennet said, appearing at his side with unmistakable approval in her voice. "Cleaned the entire downstairs, organized the pantry, and still found time to bake bread and prepare a stew that would make your mother proud." "She's not my Miss Walsh," Thomas corrected automatically. "Not yet, anyway," Mrs. Bennet snorted. "Fool man, do you know what she asked me today? If you'd prefer she find lodging in town until the wedding? Said she didn't want to compromise your reputation or make you uncomfortable." The housekeeper crossed her arms. "She's thinking of your standing in the community, while half the town is gossiping about her size and making cruel wagers on how long you'll keep her." Thomas felt a surge of protectiveness he hadn't expected. Who's saying such things? Who isn't? Meredith Evans was in fine form at the general store, talking about how you'd been swindled. Mrs. Bennet's eyes narrowed. "I set her straight, but the damage is done. That girl upstairs heard every whisper at the train station, every snicker as you drove through town. Yet here she is, working herself to the bone to prove her worth." Shame washed over Thomas. He hadn't considered how the town's reaction would affect Eleanor. He'd been too caught up in his own disappointment. Where is she now? Upstairs, writing letters. Says she promised to let her cousin know she arrived safely. Mrs. Bennet's expression softened. "She's a good woman, Thomas. Different from what you pictured, perhaps, but maybe exactly what you need." Dinner that night was less strained. Thomas made an effort to engage Eleanor in conversation, asking about her journey west and her impressions of Montana. Her face lit up when she spoke of the landscapes she'd seen from the train window, the rolling Midwestern plains, the sudden majesty of the mountains. "It's as if the country itself gets bolder as you move west," she said, her green eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Everything is larger, more dramatic. Even the sky seems bigger." "That's why they call it Big Sky Country," Everett offered with a grin. "Wait till you see it in summer, with thunderheads building taller than church steeples." Eleanor smiled at him gratefully, and Thomas felt an unexpected pang. She had a beautiful smile, warm and genuine, and he hadn't been the cause of it even once since her arrival. After the meal, while Mrs. Bennet and Eleanor cleared the dishes, Jackson cornered Thomas on the porch. "Town's talking," he said bluntly. "Meredith Evans is telling everyone you're planning to send her back." Thomas clenched his jaw. "Meredith needs to mind her own business." "Are you? Sending her back?" Thomas stared out at the darkening ranch land, the question echoing in his mind. Was he? Should he? On paper, the arrangement made as much sense as it had when he'd proposed it. Eleanor was clearly capable, hard-working, and intelligent. If she had been exactly as he'd imagined physically, would there be any question? "I don't know," he admitted. Jackson lit a cigarette, the match flaring in the gathering dusk. "She seems like a good people, Tom. Bit fuller than expected, but hell, winter's harsh out here. Might be an advantage." He exhaled a stream of smoke. "Besides, she looks at this place like it's a palace. Never seen anyone so grateful for so little." The words struck Thomas with unexpected force. Eleanor did seem genuinely appreciative of his home, his land, things he took for granted. He'd offered her a practical arrangement, yet she approached it with a reverence that made him see his own life through new eyes. That night, unable to sleep, Thomas descended to the kitchen for a glass of water. He was surprised to find Eleanor sitting at the table, a single lamp burning low, a book open before her. She wore a modest nightgown with a heavy shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her hair loose down her back. "Mr. Holloway," she gasped, startled by his appearance. "I'm sorry, I couldn't sleep and thought a little reading might help." "It's your home too," he said, then amended, "or it will be. You don't need permission to use the kitchen." Eleanor marked her place and closed the book, a veterinary text, he noted with surprise. "About that," she said carefully, "I understand if you've reconsidered our arrangement. I won't protest if you wish me to leave." The quiet dignity in her voice struck him more powerfully than any tears or accusations could have. "Is that what you want?" he asked. Eleanor looked down at her hands folded neatly on the table. "What I want," she said slowly, "is a home, security, purpose." She raised her eyes to his, and in them he saw a vulnerability that mirrored his own. "I want the life we discussed in our letters, a partnership based on mutual respect and common goals. But I won't hold you to an agreement made under false pretenses." "False pretenses," Thomas repeated. "My appearance," Eleanor clarified, a flush rising to her cheeks. "I should have been more forthright about my size. The photograph I sent was several years old, from before my cousin's illness when I was caring for her." She swallowed hard. "Food was my only comfort during those difficult years." The simple confession, stripped of excuses or defensiveness, touched something in Thomas. How many times had he sought solace in whiskey after his parents' deaths? Who was he to judge her coping mechanisms? "We all have our ways of surviving grief," he said quietly. "I'm sorry about your cousin." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly at his understanding. "Thank you." Silence fell between them, but it was different now, less strained, more contemplative. "The offer still stands," Thomas finally said. 2 weeks as planned. We'll get to know each other better and then decide." Relief washed over Eleanor's face, followed quickly by determination. "I won't disappoint you, Mr. Holloway." As she gathered her book and lamp to return upstairs, Thomas found himself saying, "Thomas, if we're to be married, you should call me Thomas." Her smile in response was like sunrise breaking over the Montana hills, gradual, warm, and full of promise. "Good night, Thomas," she said softly, and for the first time since her arrival, he felt the stirring of something unexpected, hope. The days that followed brought a rhythm to Eleanor's new life at the Holloway Ranch. She rose before dawn, prepared breakfast for Thomas and the ranch hands, then spent her mornings assisting Mrs. Bennett with household duties. The older woman proved to be a wealth of knowledge about ranch life, from preserving food to treating common ailments with frontier remedies. "My mother taught me to waste nothing," Mrs. Bennett explained as she showed Eleanor how to render beef. "Fat into tallow for candles and soap. Out here, stores are scarce and winters are long. Self-sufficiency isn't just practical, it's survival." Eleanor absorbed every lesson eagerly. Her life in Philadelphia had been one of genteel poverty, respectable, but constrained. Here, despite the backbreaking work, she felt a freedom she'd never known. The vast landscape seemed to mirror the expanding possibilities of her future. If only she could be certain there would be a future here. Thomas remained reserved, but no longer coldly distant. She often caught him watching her with an unreadable expression, as if trying to solve a particularly challenging puzzle. Their conversations were mostly practical, discussions about meal planning, household needs, the spring planting. Yet occasionally, glimpses of the man from the letters would emerge. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Thomas pointed to a distant ridge. "Wild horses gather there. In spring," he said. "Mustangs, most beautiful creatures you'll ever see, completely free." "Have you ever tried to catch them?" Eleanor asked. Thomas shook his head. Some things deserve to remain wild. He glanced at her. "My father disagreed. Spent 3 summers trying to capture the stallion that led the herd. Nearly got himself killed in the process." "What happened?" A rare smile touched Thomas's lips. "My mother happened. Told him if he didn't stop this foolishness, she'd leave him to the mountain lions." His expression softened with memory. They had that kind of marriage. Passionate disagreements followed by passionate reconciliations, the kind that keeps a household lively. Eleanor felt a pang of longing. Would they ever share such a connection? Or would theirs be a marriage of convenience, only polite but detached? "Your parents sound remarkable," she said. "They were." Sadness flickered across his face. "Influenza took them both 5 years ago, within days of each other. Maybe that was a blessing. I can't imagine either surviving without the other." Eleanor hesitated, then placed her hand gently over his. "I'm sorry for your loss." Thomas stared at their hands for a long moment but didn't pull away. "What about your parents? Your letters mentioned they passed when you were young, but you never said how." "A ferry accident on the Delaware River," Eleanor replied, the familiar ache of loss rising in her chest. "I was 16. My father was a bookkeeper, my mother a seamstress. They'd saved for months to afford a day trip to celebrate their anniversary." She swallowed hard. "The boiler exploded. 17 people died." Thomas turned his hand to clasp hers. "That's a heavy burden for a young girl to bear." "We all carry burdens," Eleanor said quietly. "They shape us, but need not define us." Their eyes met in the fading light, and for the first time, Eleanor felt truly seen by him, not as the disappointing mail-order bride, nor as the capable housekeeper, but as a woman with her own history of joys and sorrows. The moment broke when Jackson appeared around the corner of the house, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Sorry to interrupt, but we've got problems at the north pasture. Fence is down, and Miller's bull has gotten in with our heifers." Thomas stood immediately. "I'll get my rifle." "Is that necessary?" Eleanor asked, alarmed. "Miller's bull is mean as sin and twice as dangerous," Thomas explained grimly. "If he's hurt any of our heifers, I'll have to put him down and deal with Miller's complaints later." Eleanor followed them to the barn, where Thomas saddled his horse with practiced efficiency. "Don't wait up," he told her. "This could take hours to sort out." Without thinking, she reached up to straighten his collar. "Be careful." Thomas looked startled at the domestic gesture, then nodded once before mounting his horse and riding off with Jackson. Mrs. Bennet appeared at Eleanor's side, a knowing smile on her weathered face. "First time I've seen him let anyone fuss over him since his mother passed." "I wasn't fussing," Eleanor protested weakly. "Call it what you like," the housekeeper replied. "But a man doesn't allow touches he doesn't welcome." She patted Eleanor's arm. "He's warming to you. Give him time." The next morning, Eleanor woke to urgent voices below her window. Throwing on her robe, she hurried downstairs to find Thomas, and Everett carrying Jackson into the house, his face pale beneath its usual tan. "What happened?" she gasped. "Miller's bull caught him against the fence," Thomas explained tersely. "Broken ribs, maybe worse. Mrs. Bennet's gone to fetch her medicines." They laid Jackson on the kitchen table, the only surface large enough and flat enough to properly examine him. The ranch hand groaned, his breath coming in shallow gasps. We need to check for internal bleeding, Eleanor said, years of caring for her invalid cousin, giving her a calm authority. Help me remove his shirt. Thomas hesitated only briefly before complying. Together, they eased the blood-stained garment from Jackson's torso, revealing an already darkening bruise that spread across his left side. Eleanor probed gently, noting where Jackson's pain seemed most intense. 2 broken ribs, possibly 3, she assessed. His breathing is labored but not gurgling, which is a good sign. No blood at the mouth or nose. She glanced up to find Thomas staring at her in surprise. My cousin had consumption, she explained. I learned a great deal about anatomy and injury from the doctor who treated her. Mrs. Bennet burst through the door, arms full of jars and bandages. Together, the women cleaned Jackson's wounds, bound his ribs tightly, and prepared a tea of willow bark for the pain. Town doctor won't come out for less than a gunshot or childbirth, Mrs. Bennet explained to Eleanor as they worked. We've all had to become our own physicians out here. When Jackson was finally settled in the bunkhouse, with Everett keeping watch, Eleanor found Thomas on the porch, staring out at the pre-dawn landscape. Will he recover? He asked without turning. With rest and care, yes. Eleanor leaned against the porch railing. He was fortunate. Had the bull caught him fully, we'd be planning a funeral. Thomas glanced at her, his expression guarded. You handled yourself well there. Most women would have swooned at the sight of so much blood. I'm not most women, Eleanor replied simply. No, Thomas agreed quietly. You're not. The words hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Before Eleanor could respond, Thomas straightened. I should help Nate and Samuel finish securing the fence. Miller's coming at noon to retrieve his bull and pay damages. He hesitated. Thank you, Eleanor, for helping Jackson. It was the first time he'd used her given name without prompting. The sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver of warmth through her, despite the morning chill. As promised, Herbert Miller arrived at midday, his expression thunderous as he dismounted from his horse. Eleanor watched from the kitchen window. As the 2 ranchers faced off in the yard, Thomas standing tall and unyielding. That'll be trouble, Mrs. Bennet muttered beside her. Miller's had his eye on this land since Mr. Holloway Sr. passed. Thinks Thomas is too young to manage it properly. Is there any truth to that? Eleanor asked. Mrs. Bennet snorted. None whatsoever. Thomas has doubled the herd and improved every acre since taking over. Miller's just a greedy old vulture, waiting for a chance to swoop in. Outside, the conversation had escalated. Miller's voice carried through the window sharp with accusation. Your man shouldn't have spooked my prize bull, worth more than your entire sorry herd. Your bull broke through my fence and injured my ranch hand, Thomas countered, his own voice controlled but steely. You're lucky I didn't shoot the beast on sight. Miller's face reddened. Always were too big for your britches, Holloway, just like your father. Look where it got him, in the ground before his time. Eleanor saw Thomas's hands clench into fists, and without conscious decision found herself moving toward the door. She stepped onto the porch, drawing both men's attention. Mr. Miller, she called, her voice pleasant but firm. I've just made fresh coffee. Perhaps you'd care for a cup while you and Mr. Holloway discuss compensation for our injured man? Miller stared at her, momentarily derailed from his tirade. And who might you be? Eleanor Walsh, she replied, descending the steps. Mr. Holloway's fiancée. A pleasure to make your acquaintance, though I wish it were under more favorable circumstances. Miller's small eyes darted between her and Thomas, narrowing in calculation. Fiancé? First I've heard of it. We're to be married next week, Eleanor continued smoothly, coming to stand beside Thomas. She placed a hand on his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. Now, about that coffee? Thomas shot her a questioning look, but played along. Herbert, we can settle this reasonably. Your bull caused damage to my property and injured my man. Standard compensation should cover it. Miller's gaze lingered on Eleanor, taking in her full figure with a smirk that made her skin crawl. Found yourself a substantial woman, eh, Holloway? Suppose you'll need help keeping her fed. Thomas stiffened beside her, but Eleanor tightened her grip on his arm in warning. Mr. Miller, she said pleasantly. In Philadelphia, where I'm from, a gentleman would never comment on a lady's appearance. She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. But I understand frontier manners are different. Just as I understand that frontier justice tends to favor the wronged party when livestock damages property and injures workers. Isn't that right, Thomas? Thomas's lips twitched with suppressed amusement. Absolutely correct, my dear. Miller's face darkened. Fine, I'll pay the standard rate, but keep your fences stronger, Holloway. My bull goes where he pleases. As does my rifle, Thomas replied mildly. After Miller departed, Thomas turned to Eleanor with newfound respect in his eyes. That was unexpected. I hope I didn't overstep, she said, suddenly uncertain. He seemed determined to provoke you. He was, Thomas confirmed. Miller's been trying to get this land since my father first claimed it. Thinks if he pushes me hard enough, I'll sell out and head back east. A smile tugged at his mouth. He wasn't expecting reinforcements. Is that what I am, reinforcements? Thomas studied her for a long moment. Perhaps, among other things. He glanced toward the house. You told him we're to be married next week. Eleanor's cheeks warmed. I apologize for the presumption. It seemed the quickest way to diffuse the situation. No apology needed, Thomas said. The wedding is still set for Sunday, if you're willing. Her heart skipped. And you? Are you willing? Thomas's gaze held hers steadily. I'm beginning to think bringing you here was the smartest decision I've made in years. It wasn't a declaration of love, or even affection, but from a man as reserved. As Thomas Holloway, it felt monumental. Word of their impending marriage spread quickly through Pinecrest. Mrs. Bennet returned from her weekly trip to town with supplies and a wealth of gossip. Meredith Evans is fit to be tied, she reported with obvious satisfaction as she unpacked groceries. Had her cap set for Thomas herself, though he never gave her any encouragement. Eleanor paused in kneading bread dough. Should I be concerned? Mrs. Bennet waved dismissively. Meredith's father owns the general store, so she thinks that makes her frontier royalty. Been turning up her nose at perfectly good men for years, waiting for someone who meets her standards, she snorted, as if she has anything to offer besides a sharp tongue and expensive tastes. Thomas could have had his pick of local women, Eleanor said quietly. Why seek a bride from so far away? Mrs. Bennet's expression softened. After his parents died, Thomas withdrew into himself, poured everything into the ranch, working from dawn till dusk like a man possessed. The local girls see a handsome face and a prosperous ranch. They don't see the work, the sacrifice, the isolation. She patted Eleanor's flower-covered hand. You saw the man behind the letters. That's something special. The day before the wedding, a wagon arrived bearing several women from town, including the pastor's wife and the blacksmith's daughter. They carried baskets of food and small gifts, handmade soap, embroidered handkerchiefs, a jar of precious sugar. We always welcome new brides properly, explained Mrs. Miller, the blacksmith's wife, and no relation to the cantankerous Herbert, even those who arrive in unconventional ways. Eleanor received them graciously, though she felt the weight of the curious stares and the whispers that followed her as she prepared coffee. Their initial coolness thawed somewhat as the afternoon progressed. Eleanor's knowledge of household management and genuine interest in learning frontier skills gradually earned their grudging respect. You're not what we expected, Mrs. Peterson, the pastor's wife admitted as they prepared to leave. When we heard Thomas had sent for an Eastern bride, we imagined someone different. Useless, you mean, said Mrs. Miller bluntly. Lots of airs and no practical skills, Eleanor smiled. My parents believed in practical education. My father taught me mathematics so I could manage household accounts. My mother ensured I could mend, cook, and keep a home running smoothly. She didn't mention the years spent caring for her cousin, learning to stretch pennies until they screamed. Mrs. Peterson nodded approvingly. Thomas needs a sensible wife, not a delicate flower. The land is unforgiving to those who can't adapt. After they departed, Eleanor found herself alone for the first time in days. Thomas and the men were busy with final preparations for spring carving, and Mrs. Bennet had gone to her sister's home in town to fetch her good dress for the wedding. Eleanor wandered through the house that would soon be truly hers, running, her fingers along the solid furniture, straightening pictures, imagining the years ahead. Would there be children someday, filling these quiet rooms with laughter? Would she and Thomas grow old together here, watching seasons pass over the land they tended? She was standing at the window, lost in thought, when she heard the front door open. Expecting Mrs. Bennet, she called out a greeting as she turned. Instead, she found Meredith Evans standing in the parlour, impeccably dressed in a fashionable blue gown that emphasized her slender figure and golden curls. "Miss Evans," Eleanor said, recovering quickly. "What a surprise! I'm afraid Thomas isn't here at the moment." "I know," Meredith replied, her voice honey-sweet with underlying venom. "I saw him in town. He mentioned the wedding is tomorrow." "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, suddenly wary. "Pastor Miller is coming out to perform the ceremony." Meredith moved further into the room, examining the modest decorations Eleanor had added over the past days. Wild flowers in simple vases, cushions recovered, with fabric from her trunk, a braided rug before the hearth. "Playing house already," she remarked. "How domestic." Eleanor forced a smile. "Was there something you needed, Miss Evans?" Meredith turned, dropping all pretense of politeness. "I came to see you for myself. The woman Thomas Holloway chose, over every eligible girl in Pinecrest." Her eyes raked over Eleanor's figure with undisguised contempt. "Now I understand. He wanted a housekeeper, not a wife." The cruel words stung, but Eleanor had endured worse in her cousin's household. She kept her voice steady. "Mr. Holloway's reasons are his own, as are mine for accepting his proposal." "He's settling," Meredith continued, as if Eleanor hadn't spoken. "A man like Thomas deserves better than an overweight spinster, desperate enough to travel across the country to marry a stranger." Eleanor's patience snapped. "And what does he deserve, Miss Evans? A woman who values him for his land rather than his character, who sees his worth only in terms of what he can provide." She stepped closer, surprising Meredith with her sudden intensity. "I may not be what you consider beautiful, but I recognize a good man when I see one. Can you say the same?" Meredith's perfect complexion flushed with anger. "You know nothing about me or this town. You'll never belong here." "Perhaps not," Eleanor conceded, "but I will belong with Thomas. That's enough for me." For a moment, something like genuine pain flashed across Meredith's features. Then her expression hardened once more. "We'll see how long that lasts, when winter comes and you're isolated for months with nothing but cattle and cowboys for company." Before Eleanor could respond, the door opened again, admitting Thomas himself. He stopped short at the tableau before him, the two women facing off like duelists. "Meredith," he said, surprise evident in his voice, "what brings you out here?" "Just welcoming your bride-to-be to Pinecrest society," Meredith replied smoothly, her demeanor instantly transformed. "Such a unique addition to our community." Thomas's gaze shifted to Eleanor, noting her flushed cheeks and the tension in her shoulders. His expression hardened. "Eleanor is my chosen wife," he said firmly. "Anyone who can't treat her with respect is unwelcome in our home." Our home. The simple phrase sent warmth cascading through Eleanor's chest. Meredith's smile tightened. Of course, I simply wanted to extend an invitation to my father's spring social next month. All the prominent families will attend. We'll consider it, Thomas replied neutrally. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have wedding preparations to complete. The dismissal was unmistakable. Meredith gathered her dignity around her like a cloak and departed with a final, venomous glance at Eleanor. When the door closed behind her, Thomas turned to Eleanor with concern. Are you all right? Meredith can be difficult. She was merely expressing what many are thinking, Eleanor said, trying to sound unconcerned. That you could have done better. Thomas frowned. Better, according to whose standards? Meredith Evans, the town gossips. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I didn't write to Philadelphia looking for the prettiest girl or the wealthiest family. I wrote seeking a partner, someone intelligent, capable, and honest. And instead, you got me, Eleanor said quietly. Yes, Thomas agreed, stepping closer. Instead, I got a woman who can manage a household, treat injuries, stand up to Herbert Miller, and still find time to make this house feel like a home for the first time in years. His voice softened. I got exactly what I asked for, Eleanor. Perhaps more than I deserve. He reached out, hesitantly touching her cheek with calloused fingers. I've been unfair to you, judging you for an honest mistake while holding myself to a different standard. Eleanor leaned into his touch, her heart racing. What are you saying? Thomas, his grey eyes held hers intently. I'm saying I want this marriage to be real, not just a practical arrangement, but a true partnership. He swallowed visibly. If you'll still have me. Eleanor's vision blurred with unexpected tears. Are you certain? Once we're married... I've never been more certain of anything, Thomas interrupted. With gentle firmness, he drew her into his arms. You're a remarkable woman, Eleanor Walsh, and I'd be a fool to let you go. The kiss that followed was tentative at first, then deepening with shared longing. When they finally parted, both breathless, Eleanor saw in Thomas's eyes the same wonder she felt, the surprise of finding connection where they had expected mere convenience. Tomorrow, then, she whispered against his lips. Tomorrow, he agreed, and all the days after. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and mild, as if Montana itself approved of the union. Eleanor stood at her bedroom window, watching the first golden rays of sunlight touch the distant mountains. In just a few hours, she would be Mrs. Thomas Holloway. The thought sent butterflies dancing through her stomach, equal parts excitement and nervousness. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Bennet's entrance. The housekeeper carried a large box and wore an expression of barely contained delight. "Good morning, bride," she said warmly. "I've brought something for you." Eleanor opened the box to find a wedding dress of cream-colored silk, simple but elegant with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Her breath caught. "It was Thomas's mother's," Mrs. Bennet explained. "He asked me to offer it to you, though he wants you to know there's no obligation if you'd prefer to wear your own dress." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes as she lifted the gown. "It's beautiful," she whispered. The fact that Thomas would share something so precious, so tied to his beloved mother, spoke volumes about his growing feelings. "Sarah Holloway was built generously too," Mrs. Bennet said with practical approval. "Not quite as tall as you, but the dress should fit well enough with minor adjustments." Eleanor hesitated. "Are you certain Thomas wants me to have this? It's such a treasured memento." His exact words were, "Tell Eleanor that nothing would honor my mother's memory more than seeing her dress worn by another strong woman who understands what it means to build a life on this land." Mrs. Bennet's eyes twinkled. For a man of few words, he certainly found the right ones this time. The next hours passed in a flurry of preparation. Mrs. Bennet helped Eleanor bathe and dress, then arranged her auburn hair in an elegant twist adorned with wildflowers gathered by Everett's young sister, who had arrived with her family for the ceremony. By mid-morning, the yard was filled with wagons and horses as neighbors from surrounding ranches arrived bearing food and good wishes. Pastor Miller set up a simple altar beneath the sprawling oak tree, where Thomas's parents had been married 28 years earlier. Eleanor watched from her window as Thomas greeted guests, handsome in a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. Despite his usual reserve, he moved among the visitors with easy confidence, accepting congratulations and clapping backs with the men, bowing politely to the women. "He looks like his father today," Mrs. Bennet observed, misty-eyed. John Holloway was the handsomest man in 3 territories, but it was his integrity that won Sarah's heart. She squeezed Eleanor's hand, like mother, like son. A knock at the door revealed Jackson, pale but upright, supported by a wooden crutch. "Miss Walsh," he said respectfully, removing his hat with his free hand. "I wondered if I might have a word." Mrs. Bennet discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone. "You should be resting," Eleanor admonished gently. Jackson smiled, the expression transforming his usually stern face. "Wasn't going to miss this day. Besides, Doc says you did a fine job with the ribs." He shifted uncomfortably. "That's partly why I'm here. To thank you." He paused. "And to ask a favor." "Of course," Eleanor said, surprised. "Anything within my power. I know it's customary for a bride to be given away by her father or male relative," Jackson said. "Since you have neither present, I thought perhaps, if you wouldn't mind." He cleared his throat. "It would be an honor to escort you." Emotion welled in Eleanor's throat. From their first meeting, Jackson had been the most openly skeptical of her presence. This gesture represented not just acceptance, but genuine respect. "The honor would be mine," she managed to say past the lump in her throat. Jackson nodded once, clearly relieved. "Tom's a good man," he said. "Stubborn as a mule and twice as hard-headed when he thinks he's right. But he'll stand by you through anything, once he's given his word." His weathered face softened. "He deserves happiness. We all think you might be the one to give it to him." Before Eleanor could respond, Mrs. Bennet returned to announce it was time. With a final adjustment to Eleanor's dress and a quick blessing, she ushered them toward the stairs. The guests fell silent as Eleanor emerged from the house on Jackson's arm. She felt the weight of their stares, some curious, some approving, a few still dubious, but found her focus drawn inevitably to Thomas waiting beneath the oak tree. His expression as he watched her approach made every whispered insult, every moment of doubt vanish like morning mist. His eyes, usually guarded, shone with undisguised admiration and something deeper that made her heart race. Pastor Miller spoke, the traditional words, his voice carrying across the quiet gathering. When asked if he took Eleanor as his lawfully wedded wife, Thomas's "I do" rang out clear and confident. Eleanor's response was softer, but equally certain. As Thomas slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's, Mrs. Bennet had explained. Earlier, he held her gaze with an intensity that spoke of promises beyond those being formally exchanged. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder," Pastor Miller proclaimed. "You may kiss your bride." Thomas cupped Eleanor's face with gentle hands and kissed her with surprising tenderness, a contrast to his usual reserve. The assembled guests broke into applause and cheers. "Mrs. Holloway," he whispered against her lips, his voice rough with emotion. The name settled over her like a favorite quilt, providing a sense of belonging she had craved since her parents' deaths. No longer Eleanor Walsh, alone in the world. Now Eleanor Holloway, wife, partner, and for the first time in years, truly home. The celebration continued throughout the day. Tables laden with food were set up in the yard, and someone produced a fiddle for dancing. Eleanor found herself passed from partner to partner as neighbours welcomed her officially into the community. "You've done well by yourself, Holloway," Herbert Miller grudgingly told Thomas as they shared a glass of whiskey. "Got yourself a woman with sense and spine. Rare combination." "I know," Thomas replied, his eyes finding Eleanor across the yard, where she laughed at something Everett's father had said, "Rarer than I deserved." By sunset, the guests had departed, leaving behind well wishes and enough leftover food to last a week. Mrs. Bennet, who would be staying with her sister in town for the next few days to give the newlyweds privacy, hugged Eleanor tightly. "Be patient with each other," she advised. "Marriage is a journey, not a destination. You'll both make mistakes along the way." Her eyes twinkled. Making up is half the fun. Then they were alone. Thomas and Eleanor Holloway, husband and wife, standing on the porch of their home as twilight deepened into night. "Would you like to see something?" Thomas asked, breaking the slightly awkward silence. When Eleanor nodded, he took her hand. "We'll need the horses." Curious, Eleanor followed him to the barn, where he saddled 2 mounts. With Thomas's help, she arranged her wedding dress to accommodate riding astride. There had been no time or reason to acquire a side saddle. Thomas led them up a winding trail behind the house, climbing steadily into the foothills. The nearly full moon provided ample light, turning the landscape into a silver-washed dreamscape. Finally, they reached a small plateau overlooking the entire valley. "My father brought my mother here on their wedding night," Thomas explained, as they dismounted. "And his father before him. It's a Holloway tradition." He spread a blanket on the soft grass. "Sit with me?" Eleanor joined him, breathless from both the ride and the significance of the moment. Below them, the ranch was visible in miniature, lamplight glowing softly from windows, silver moonlight gleaming on the creek that wound through the property. "It's magnificent," she whispered. "This land has been in my family for 3 generations, Thomas said, his voice quiet in the darkness. "Everything I am is tied to it. When my parents died, I nearly lost myself in grief. The ranch was all that kept me tethered to this world." He took her hand, tracing the gold band on her finger. "I want you to understand what you're part of. Now." "I think I'm beginning to," Eleanor replied. The vastness of the Montana night sky above them, scattered with more stars than she had ever seen, somehow didn't feel intimidating but protective. A canopy sheltering their new beginning. Thomas's, fingers interlaced with hers. "I meant what I said yesterday. I want a real marriage, Eleanor, not just a practical arrangement." He hesitated. "But I understand if you need time. We've known each other such a short while." Eleanor's heart swelled with tenderness. This strong, self-sufficient man giving her the choice, the control. "Thomas," she said gently, turning to face him. The moonlight silvered his features, highlighting the vulnerability in his eyes. "I traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, leaving behind everything familiar. I didn't do so lightly, nor with illusions about what it would entail." She placed her free hand against his cheek. "I knew we would build our feelings gradually, through shared work and purpose. I hoped affection would grow in time." Her voice softened. "I didn't expect to find myself caring for you so quickly." Thomas covered her hand with his own. "When you stepped off that train, I nearly convinced myself I'd made a terrible mistake. Not because of how you looked, though that surprised me, but because I suddenly realized the enormity of what I'd done, bringing a stranger into my life, my home, based on words on paper." He smiled ruefully. "Then I watched you face down the town's whispers with dignity, saw you work alongside Mrs. Bennet without complaint, witnessed your compassion with Jackson and your quick thinking with Miller." His voice deepened. And I realized appearance means nothing compared to character. You are exactly who your letters promised. Intelligent, determined, kind. Everything I could want in a wife. Eleanor felt tears gather. Even though I'm not beautiful? Thomas finished for her. His gaze traveled over her face, down to where the wedding dress hugged her generous curves. My father once told me that beauty isn't found in perfect features or fashionable figures. It's in the strength of a woman's spirit, the warmth of her heart, the cleverness of her mind. His voice roughened. By those measures, Eleanor Holloway, you are the most beautiful woman I've ever known. Their kiss beneath the Montana stars felt like a true beginning, passionate, tender, and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "Shall we go home, wife?" he whispered. "Yes, husband," she replied. "Let's go home." Spring on the ranch brought constant activity. Calving season kept everyone working from dawn until dusk, often through the night as well. Eleanor quickly learned to assist with deliveries, bottle feed orphaned calves, and keep the household running smoothly despite the chaos. "You're a natural," Thomas told her one evening as they sat on the porch, exhausted but satisfied after a particularly challenging day. A heifer had delivered twins, a rare and dangerous occurrence that had required both their efforts to save. Mother and calves. "I enjoy the work," Eleanor admitted. "In Philadelphia, my days were so constrained. Here, I feel useful." Thomas took her hand, a gesture that had become habitual in their 3 weeks of marriage. "You're more than useful. You're essential." The words warmed her, especially as they were accompanied by the admiring glance that had increasingly replaced his earlier reserve. Their marriage was evolving into something neither had fully anticipated, a partnership of equals built on mutual respect and growing affection. Physical intimacy had developed naturally, their initial awkwardness giving way to genuine passion. Thomas proved to be a considerate lover, attentive to her pleasure and openly appreciative of her curves. "More to love," he'd murmured against her skin on their wedding night, effectively banishing her self-consciousness. As May turned to June, the ranch settled into a steadier rhythm. Eleanor had established her own routine, balancing household management with her growing involvement in ranch operations. With Mrs. Bennett's guidance, she planted an expanded vegetable garden and began making plans for fall preserving. When Thomas suggested they attend the Evans Spring Social, Eleanor was surprised. "Are you certain? After Meredith's visit?" Thomas grinned, a boyish expression that still caught her off guard. "Precisely because of Meredith's visit. I want everyone in Pinecrest to see my beautiful wife and understand how fortunate I am." The evening of the social, Eleanor dressed with particular care in a blue silk gown she had altered from one of her Philadelphia dresses. The modifications, letting out seams, adding panels of complementary fabric, had resulted in a garment that flattered her figure rather than attempting to disguise it. Thomas's appreciative whistle when she descended the stairs confirmed her success. "You'll be the most beautiful woman there," he said, offering his arm. Eleanor laughed. "Hardly, but I'll be the happiest, and that's far better." The Evans home was the largest in Pinecrest, a 2-story structure with glass windows and a proper parlor. Lanterns illuminated the yard, where tables had been set up for refreshments, and a small band played for dancing. Their arrival caused a momentary lull in conversation. Eleanor felt the familiar weight of scrutiny, but lifted her chin and smiled. Thomas's hand at the small of her back provided silent support. To her surprise, many of the women who had attended her welcoming gathering approached with genuine warmth, inquiring about the ranch and sharing local news. The men, following Thomas's lead, treated her with courteous respect. Only Meredith maintained a glacial distance, her slender figure draped dramatically over the arm of a well-dressed stranger she introduced as her cousin from Denver. Maxwell. is in banking, she informed everyone within earshot. He's considering investing in local properties. Her pointed look at Thomas spoke volumes. Wise decision, Thomas replied politely. Montana's future is bright. He turned to Eleanor. Would you honor me with a dance, Mrs. Holloway? As they joined other couples in a lively reel, Eleanor noticed Maxwell Evans watching them with undisguised interest. Meredith's cousin seems quite attentive, she observed. Thomas snorted softly. He's been asking questions all evening about the largest ranches in the area, mentioned foreclosures and consolidation opportunities. I don't trust him. You think he's looking to acquire distressed properties? Thomas nodded. Times have been hard since last year's drought. Several smaller spreads are struggling to meet bank payments. His expression darkened. Men like Evans prey on misfortune. Later, as Eleanor chatted with Mrs. Miller near the refreshment table, she overheard Maxwell speaking to Herbert Miller. A prime location on the creek, Miller was saying in a hushed voice. Holloway's too proud to admit he's overextended. Young fool borrowed heavily to expand the herd after his parents died. Interesting, Maxwell replied. And you say the note is held by First Montana Bank, the one that recently changed ownership? Same. New management might not be as patient as old Harrison was. One bad season or an unexpected expense. Miller made a throat-cutting gesture. Foreclosure. Eleanor felt cold despite the warm evening. She excused herself from Mrs. Miller and sought Thomas, who was deep in conversation with the blacksmith. Could we step outside for a moment? She asked quietly. When they had moved beyond earshot of the other guests, she relayed what she had overheard. Thomas's jaw tightened. Miller's been waiting years for me to fail. Seems he's tired of waiting and looking to hurry things along. Is it true? About the loan? Thomas hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. After my parents died, blue-tongue disease hit the herd hard. I needed capital to rebuild. Harrison at the bank understood ranching, knew it was a sound investment despite the temporary setback. His expression grew troubled. But he retired last month. His replacement is from Chicago, knows banking but not cattle. What happens if they call in the note? We'd have 6 months to pay in full, Thomas replied grimly. Nearly impossible. With our cash on hand, we'd have to sell most of the herd at rock-bottom prices. Eleanor's mind raced. There must be options. What about a new loan from another bank? Possibly, though terms would likely be worse. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. I'm sorry, Eleanor. This isn't what you signed on for. She straightened her shoulders. I signed on to be your wife, your partner. That means sharing burdens, as well as joys. She squeezed his hand. We'll find a solution together. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. What did I do to deserve you? He murmured. You wrote me beautiful letters, she replied with a small smile, and you saw beyond appearances to the woman beneath. Their quiet moment was interrupted by Meredith, who approached with Maxwell in tow. Thomas, Eleanor! Maxwell was just saying how eager he is to see more of our beautiful countryside. Her smile was sharp as a blade. Perhaps you could show him your ranch someday. Of course, Thomas replied smoothly, though I'm afraid we're quite busy with summer operations at present. Maxwell stepped forward, extending his hand. I understand completely. Business before pleasure, a philosophy I live by myself. His assessing gaze moved between them. I'm particularly interested in sustainable ranching practices. I hear the Holloway spread is quite progressive. The emphasis on the last word raised Eleanor's hackles. There was something predatory in the man's demeanor that reminded her of her cousin's creditors, circling vultures waiting for weakness. My husband is an innovative steward of his family's legacy, she said, matching Maxwell's urbane tone. The Holloway approach has withstood 3 generations of Montana's challenges. Impressive longevity, Maxwell acknowledged, though even the strongest trees may bend in the right storm. He smiled blandly. I look forward to our future acquaintance, Mr. and Mrs. Holloway. Montana's business landscape promises fascinating developments in coming months. As the banker and Meredith moved away, Thomas exhaled slowly. That man is dangerous. Agreed, Eleanor said, and I believe he's working with Miller somehow. Thomas nodded grimly. Miller knows every inch of our property. He could guide Evans straight to our vulnerabilities. He glanced down at Eleanor with renewed concern. This could get ugly. She straightened her spine, determination replacing apprehension. Then it's fortunate you married a woman who isn't afraid of ugly situations. She met his gaze steadily. My father always said knowledge is power. We need to understand exactly what we're facing. First thing tomorrow, I'll ride into town and speak with Harrison, Thomas decided. Retired or not, he'll have insight into the bank's new direction. Eleanor nodded. And I'll review the account books. My father taught me bookkeeping. Perhaps I'll see opportunities we've overlooked. As they prepared to depart the social, several neighbors stopped to chat, their manner notably warmer than at the train station months earlier. Eleanor had become a familiar face at church services and town gatherings. Her genuine interest in local affairs and willingness to help during recent challenges, including delivering Mrs. Parker's baby when the doctor was unavailable, gradually earning Pinecrest's acceptance. Seems you've won them over, Thomas observed as they rode home beneath a canopy of stars. Not all of them, Eleanor replied, thinking of Meredith's cold eyes. But enough. Thomas reached across to squeeze her hand. All that matters is that you won me. Despite the financial threat looming over them, Eleanor felt a surge of contentment. Whatever challenges awaited, they would face them together. No longer strangers bound by practicality, but partners united by something far stronger. Something that had grown from the soil of mutual respect and blossomed against all expectations into love. The following morning, Thomas rode into town while Eleanor settled at his desk with the ranch's account books. Years of meticulous record-keeping by Thomas's father provided a clear picture of the Holloway Ranch's financial history. Thomas had maintained the practice, documenting every expense and income with exacting precision. Eleanor traced her finger down columns of numbers, a skill honed during years of stretching her meager inheritance to support herself and her ailing cousin. The pattern that emerged confirmed her concerns. The ranch was profitable, but cash reserves had been steadily depleted by the loan payments. One significant setback would indeed leave them vulnerable. When Thomas returned mid-afternoon, his expression was grim. Harrison confirmed our fears, he said, accepting the coffee Eleanor poured. The new bank manager, Whitley, has orders from the Eastern investors to optimize the portfolio. That means calling in notes considered high risk and refusing extensions. And we're considered high risk? Thomas nodded. Cattle ranching is always seen as speculative by Eastern bankers. Too many variables, weather, disease, market prices. He ran a hand through his wind-tousled hair. Harrison warned me that Whitley's already reviewing all outstanding loans. He expects formal notices to go out within the month. Eleanor placed her hand over his. How much time would that give us? 6 months, legally. But practically speaking, we'd need to begin liquidating assets immediately to have any chance of meeting the full payment. I've been reviewing the books, Eleanor said. The operation is sound. It's just the timing that's against us. If we had another year, a year we don't have, Thomas finished. Not unless we find another source of capital quickly. They fell silent, each contemplating the magnitude of the threat. The loss of the ranch would mean more than financial hardship. It represented Thomas's heritage, his parents' legacy, the future they had begun to envision together. What about a selling part of the land? Eleanor suggested. The northwest section you mentioned wasn't good grazing ground. Thomas shook his head. Miller would be the only interested buyer, and he'd offer pennies on the dollar, knowing our situation. His jaw tightened. Besides, once we start breaking up the ranch, we'll never get it back. Eleanor's mind raced, considering and discarding options. What about diversifying? Your father's ledgers show he experimented with crops on the eastern fields. Wheat, Thomas confirmed. The soil's decent, but water access is limited. Without irrigation, yields were too unpredictable. He gave a hollow laugh. Irrigation would require more capital than we're trying to raise. A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Mrs. Bennet entered, followed by a familiar figure, Nora Patterson, the widow who owned the small dress shop in Pinecrest. "Look who I found at the gate," Mrs. Bennet announced. "Says she has business to discuss." Eleanor rose to greet their visitor. Though not close, she had become acquainted with Nora through church activities. The older woman had lost her husband in the same influenza outbreak that claimed Thomas's parents, leaving her to support herself with dressmaking skills learned in her native Boston. "Mrs. Patterson, what brings you all the way out here?" Nora patted her grey, streaked hair nervously. "Business, as Mrs. Bennet said, a proposition, actually." She glanced between Eleanor and Thomas. "For both of you." Thomas gestured to the parlour chairs. "Please sit. Any proposition is worth hearing these days." Once settled with tea, Nora explained her visit. "As you know, my little shop barely keeps me afloat. The women of Pinecrest have simple needs, basic dresses, occasional alterations, but I received news yesterday that my sister's health has worsened. She's asked me to return to Boston to care for her." "I'm sorry to hear that," Eleanor said sincerely. Nora nodded in acknowledgement. "The thing is, I can't afford to simply close the shop. It's my only asset. I need to sell it." She looked directly at Eleanor. "When you altered your dress for the social, several women commented on your skill. Mrs. Miller mentioned you had training in Philadelphia." Eleanor's cheeks warmed at the unexpected compliment. "My mother was a seamstress. She taught me the basics, and I learned more by helping with her commissions." "It shows," Nora said. "Your work has a professional quality, missing in most frontier sewing." She leaned forward. "I'm proposing to sell you my shop, inventory, and equipment. The building comes with living quarters above, though small. It's not much, but it's debt-free and generates steady, if modest, income." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "That's very kind, but I don't have funds for such a purchase." "I'm proposing the terms," Nora continued. "A small down payment with the balance paid in monthly installments from the shop's proceeds. I've calculated that with careful management, you could meet the payments while still taking a reasonable income." Thomas and Eleanor exchanged glances, the same thought clearly occurring to both. Additional income, even modest, could help buffer their precarious financial situation. "It's an intriguing offer," Thomas said carefully, "but Eleanor's place is here on the ranch." Nora smiled knowingly. "I anticipated that objection. The shop need only be open 3 days a week to serve Pinecrest's needs. The remaining work, alterations, special orders, can be done anywhere." Her gaze swept the comfortable parlour. "Including here." The possibilities unfolded in Eleanor's mind. "I could maintain the household while contributing additional income," she mused aloud, "and perhaps expand the offerings, household linens, quilts for winter." Thomas watched her with growing interest. "You'd enjoy such work." "I would," Eleanor admitted. "I've always loved creating beautiful, useful things." She hesitated, looking at Thomas. "But it would mean time away from the ranch, from our home." 3 days in town is not so much," Thomas replied thoughtfully, "especially if it brings you satisfaction alongside financial benefit." His expression softened. "I want you to be fulfilled, Eleanor, not just useful." The sentiment touched her deeply. How far they had come from those first awkward days when practicality was their only acknowledged connection. "There's the matter of the down payment," she reminded him gently, returning to practicalities. "I have savings," Nora interjected. "Not much, but enough to cover travel to Boston and establish myself there. I'm more concerned with finding someone who will maintain the shop's reputation and care for my customers." She smiled at Eleanor. "When I saw your work, I knew I'd found that person." After Nora departed with a promise from them to consider her offer, Thomas and Eleanor sat in thoughtful silence. "It wouldn't solve our larger problem," Thomas finally said, "but it could help extend our runway while we seek other solutions." Eleanor nodded. "And it would establish me in the community in my own right. Not just as Thomas Holloway's mail-order bride, but as a businesswoman with valuable skills." Thomas took her hand, his expression serious. "You've never been just anything to me, Eleanor. Not since I watched you stand tall against Pinecrest's whispers with more dignity than the lot of them deserved." His voice roughened. "But I understand the need to be seen for your own merits." Eleanor squeezed his fingers in silent gratitude. "We should accept Nora's offer," she said with newfound conviction. "It feels right somehow, a step toward securing our future." Thomas nodded. "I agree. We'll tell her tomorrow." The decision made, they turned their attention to dinner preparations. The familiar domestic routine, a comforting contrast to the day's weighty discussions. As Eleanor kneaded bread dough, Thomas leaned against the kitchen doorframe, watching her with undisguised admiration. "What?" she asked, self-conscious under his steady gaze. "Just appreciating my wife," he replied with a smile that still had the power to quicken her pulse. "And thinking how fortunate I am that you stepped off that train." Before Eleanor could respond, Jackson appeared behind Thomas, clearing his throat apologetically. "Trouble at the North Pasture again?" he reported. "Fences down, and some of the yearlings have strayed onto Miller's land." Thomas's smile vanished. "Miller's not one to miss an opportunity for complaint. We'd better retrieve them before he notices." He grabbed his hat from the hook. "Don't wait for dinner for me." Eleanor watched him stride toward the barn with Jackson, concern creasing her brow. The timing of the fence damage seemed suspiciously convenient, given their recent encounter with Miller at the social. Her suspicion deepened the following day when Thomas returned from Nora's shop with news that Maxwell Evans had been making inquiries about various properties surrounding the Holloway Ranch. "Nora overheard him at the general store," Thomas explained, as they walked toward the vegetable garden where Eleanor had been weeding. "He specifically asked about water rights and access to the creek that runs through our land." Eleanor frowned. "The creek is essential to the ranch's operation." "Exactly. Without it, the grazing lands would be half as productive." Thomas's expression darkened. "Evans is gathering intelligence, mapping our vulnerabilities. The question is why? Perhaps he truly is interested in investment opportunities," Eleanor suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. Thomas shook his head. "A banker from Denver doesn't suddenly develop interest in Montana ranching without specific motivation. No, he's working an angle, and I'd wager Miller's involved." The next weeks brought a flurry of activity as Eleanor balanced ranch responsibilities with preparations to take over Nora's shop. The widow proved a patient teacher, introducing Eleanor to her regular customers and sharing the particular preferences of Pinecrest's prominent families. "Mrs. Miller insists her seams be finished by hand, though machine stitching would be stronger," Nora confided, "and never suggest fashion plates to Mrs. Peterson. She considers them vain and worldly." Eleanor absorbed these insights alongside practical lessons in managing inventory and accounts. To her surprise, she found genuine enjoyment in the work. The creative aspects satisfied something within her that ranch duties, for all their importance, did not touch. Thomas, true to his Word supported her endeavour wholeheartedly. He constructed a sewing table for the parlour corner where Eleanor could work on evenings at home, positioning it to catch the best natural light. "My father built my mother a similar table," he explained as he sanded the edges smooth. "She made quilts in winter when ranch work slowed," said it kept her hands busy and her mind peaceful. The mention of his parents had become easier for him, Eleanor noted. Where once such recollections brought pain, now they more often prompted fond reminiscence, a healing she hoped she had played some small part in facilitating. June blossomed into July, bringing scorching days and the occasional violent thunderstorm that briefly transformed the parched landscape. Eleanor divided her time between town and ranch, establishing a rhythm that seemed sustainable for both endeavors. The shop, rechristened Eleanor's Fine Sewing, gradually gained customers beyond Nora's established clientele. Word spread of the new proprietress's skill with difficult fabrics and her knack for adapting Eastern fashions to frontier practicality. Even Meredith Evans, despite her continued frostiness, commissioned a dress for the upcoming Independence Day celebration. Her request for something that highlights one's natural advantages carried a pointed emphasis that Eleanor chose to ignore. "She hopes I'll make her look ridiculous," Eleanor told Thomas that evening as they sat on the porch, watching heat lightning dance on the horizon. "But I'll deliver something so beautiful she'll have no choice but to wear it," Thomas grinned. "Killing with kindness." "Professional integrity," Eleanor corrected primly, then smiled, "though I won't deny a certain satisfaction." The peaceful moment shattered with the arrival of a rider, Samuel, one of the ranch hands. His horse lathered from hard riding. "Fire at the South Range," he reported breathlessly. "Lightning strike. It's spreading fast toward the summer grazing land." Thomas was on his feet instantly. "Gather every hand. We'll need all the help we can. Get," he turned to Eleanor, "stay here. If it jumps the creek, I'll organize the evacuation of the house," she finished for him. "Be careful, Thomas." He kissed her quickly, then was gone, leaving Eleanor to pace anxiously as distant flames painted the night sky in ominous orange. Hours passed with no word. Eleanor prepared supplies, bandages, burn salve, water containers, and packed essential documents into a small trunk, ready for quick removal if necessary. Despite Thomas's instruction to remain at the house, she found herself unable to stay idle while knowing he and the men faced danger. Decision made, she saddled her mare and rode toward the southern boundary, guided by the glow of flames visible, even across the miles of ranch land. The closer she drew, the more apparent the scale of the disaster became. A wall of fire stretched across the horizon, devouring dry grassland with terrifying speed. She found Thomas and the ranch hands at the creek, using wet blankets to extinguish sparks that jumped the natural firebreak. Their faces were blackened with soot, clothing singed in places from close calls. "Eleanor!" Thomas shouted when he spotted her. "I told you to stay at the house." "I brought supplies," she called back, dismounting and unloading her saddlebags. "Water, bandages, salve for burns." Jackson approached, accepting a water canteen gratefully. "Glad to see you, Mrs. Holloway. We've got men down with smoke inhalation and minor burns." Eleanor's nursing instincts took over. She established a makeshift treatment area on the creek bank, tending to injured ranch hands while monitoring the fire's progression. The men had managed to divert its path away from the main grazing lands, but not before significant damage occurred. Dawn broke to reveal the extent of destruction, nearly a quarter of the summer pasture reduced to smoking ash. Thomas, face grim beneath layers of soot, assessed the loss with experienced eyes. "We'll need to move the herd north earlier than planned," he told Eleanor as they rode back to the house. "The remaining grazing land won't sustain them through August. Can the northern pastures handle them?" Thomas's hesitation answered before his words. "Not fully. We'll need to reduce the herd size. The implications hung heavy between them. Selling cattle now, before they reached optimal market weight, and at the peak of summer when prices traditionally dipped, would mean financial loss. Loss they could ill afford with the bank loan situation still unresolved. It was lightning, Eleanor said slowly. No one could have prevented it. Thomas's expression remained troubled. Perhaps. But Miller's hands were suspiciously quick to appear with offers of assistance and information about which parts of the pasture were burning. You think it was deliberately set? Horror colored Eleanor's voice. I think Miller stands to benefit from our misfortune, Thomas replied carefully. And I think Maxwell Evans arrived in Pinecrest with very specific intentions regarding land acquisition. Before Eleanor could respond, they crested the final rise to the ranch house and froze at the sight that greeted them. A sleek black carriage waited in the yard, a driver in formal attire standing beside it. Bank representative, Thomas muttered. Spurring his horse forward, a well-dressed man descended from the ranch house porch as they approached. His pinstriped suit and gleaming shoes looked absurdly out of place in the dusty yard. Mr. Holloway, he greeted, consulting a small notebook. I'm Frederick Whitley, manager of First Montana Bank. I've been attempting to deliver this notice, personally. He extended an official-looking envelope. Thomas dismounted slowly, exhaustion evident in every movement. Couldn't it have waited until we'd handled the fire emergency? Whitley's expression remained impassive. Banking business operates on its own schedule, I'm afraid. His gaze traveled to Eleanor, still astride her horse, her dress soot-stained and her hair escaping its pins. Mrs. Holloway, I presume? Eleanor lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed by his obvious disdain. Yes, you'll forgive our appearance. We've been fighting to save our livelihood. Indeed, Whitley's thin smile held no warmth, which relates directly to my visit. Given recent events, the bank has accelerated its review of outstanding loans. He gestured to the envelope Thomas now held. Your note has been called in full, with payment due within 90 days, rather than the standard 6 months. Thomas's face hardened. That's not legal. The terms clearly state, Clause 17 allows for modification of terms in the event of significant collateral devaluation. Whitley interrupted smoothly. The fire has substantially reduced the ranch's value as security against the loan. How? Could you possibly know the extent of the damage already? Eleanor demanded, sliding from her horse to stand beside Thomas. Whitley's smile tightened further. News travels quickly in small communities, Mrs. Holloway. My sources indicated significant loss of grazing land, which directly impacts the ranch's productivity and thus its value. Your sources, Thomas repeated flatly. Would those sources include Herbert Miller by chance, or perhaps Maxwell Evans? Something flickered in Whitley's cold eyes, confirmation enough for Eleanor. The bank's decisions are based solely on financial considerations, he replied. The notice contains full details regarding payment options and consequences of default. He tipped his hat. Good day to you both. As the carriage departed in a cloud of dust, Thomas tore open the envelope. His expression confirmed Eleanor's worst fears. 90 days, he said, voice hollow. With nearly a quarter of our grazing land destroyed and cattle we'll have to sell. At rock-bottom prices. He looked up, anguish evident in his eyes. Eleanor, I don't see how we can meet this deadline. She stepped forward, taking the notice from his hands and replacing it with her own steady grasp. Then we find another way, she said firmly. Together. For a moment, he seemed to draw strength from her certainty. Then his shoulders slumped with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. I'm sorry, he said quietly. This isn't the life I promised you when you came west. Security, stability, it's all at risk now. Eleanor cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. I didn't marry the Holloway Ranch, Thomas. I married you, Whatever comes, we face it as partners." She managed a small smile. "Besides, we have 90 days. A great deal can happen in 90 days." Thomas covered her hands with his own, his expression softening despite the gravity of their situation. "How did a man like me get fortunate enough to find a woman like you? You wrote beautiful letters," Eleanor reminded him, echoing her words from their wedding night. "And you saw me, truly saw me, when others looked away. The moment of connection fortified them both. Whatever schemes Miller and Evans had set in motion, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would confront them together. No longer mail order. Bride and lonely rancher, but husband and wife bound by something neither had anticipated in those early days." Love, Eleanor realized as Thomas pulled her into his embrace, was perhaps the most unexpected outcome of her journey west, and the most powerful weapon they possessed against those who sought to defeat them. The following days brought little rest. Thomas and the ranch hands worked tirelessly to relocate cattle from the burned pasture, while Eleanor divided her time between the shop in town and assisting with ranch operations. The relentless summer heat compounded their challenges, turning the landscape brittle and the air thick with dust. Eleanor returned from town one afternoon to find Thomas at the kitchen table with Jackson and Everett, maps spread before them. "We've moved the main herd to the North Range," Thomas explained as she joined them, "but it can't sustain them for long. We need alternatives." "What about the Morrison property?" Jackson suggested, pointing to an adjacent plot on the map. "Old man Morrison died last winter. His daughter in California is looking to sell." Thomas shook his head. "Morrison's land is mostly wooded hills, good for timber but poor grazing. Besides, purchasing more land isn't an option when we can barely keep what we have." Eleanor studied the map, noting the blue line of the creek winding through the Holloway property and beyond. "What about water rights?" she asked. "Could we negotiate access to additional grazing land in exchange for water rights to neighboring properties?" The men looked at her with surprise that quickly transformed into thoughtful consideration. "The Wilson place to the east has decent pasture, but limited water," Everett mused. "They've been hauling from the South Fork for years." Thomas traced the creek's path with his finger. "We could offer controlled access to the creek in exchange for grazing rights." He glanced at Eleanor with newfound respect. "It wouldn't solve everything, but it could help us avoid selling too many head before they reach prime condition." "Worth approaching Wilson," Jackson agreed. "He's a reasonable man, unlike some neighbors I could name." The strategy proved successful. Ezra Wilson, a weathered rancher in his 60s, readily agreed to the arrangement. "Been meaning to dig a proper channel to that south pasture for years," he told Thomas and Eleanor over coffee at his modest homestead. "Never had the time or manpower. Your cattle get grazing space, my land gets reliable water. Seems fair to me." As they rode back to the Holloway ranch, Thomas reached across to squeeze Eleanor's hand. "That was good thinking," he said with genuine admiration. "I've been so focused on traditional solutions, I missed the obvious." Eleanor smiled, warmed by his praise. "Sometimes fresh eyes see different possibilities." She hesitated. "I've been thinking about other approaches too." That evening, after dinner, she outlined her ideas, expanding the dress shop to include ready-made items that could be sold to passing travelers, offering mending services to the single men working at nearby ranches, potentially even supplying the mining camp 30 miles north with basic necessities. The shop could generate more income, she explained, not enough to pay off the banknote entirely, but perhaps sufficient to demonstrate increasing revenue and stability, which might to convince another bank to refinance the loan on better terms. Thomas listened intently, asking questions about cost projections and time requirements without dismissing her suggestions as impractical or inappropriate for a rancher's wife, a response she might have expected from other men. "You have a head for business," he observed when she finished. Your father taught you well. He believed women should understand finances, Eleanor replied. Too many widows ended up destitute because their husbands kept them ignorant of money matters. Thomas's expression sobered. A wise perspective. Life holds no guarantees, especially on the frontier. He reached for her hand across the table. I'm grateful you're not just my wife, but my partner in every sense. The tenderness in his voice made her heart swell. How far they had come from those first uncertain days. The next morning brought unexpected visitors, Herbert Miller and Maxwell Evans, arriving in Evans's sleek carriage. Holloway, Miller called as Thomas emerged onto the porch. Hope we're not interrupting your labors. Thomas's expression remained neutral, despite the obvious mockery in Miller's tone. What can I do for you, gentlemen? We've come with a proposition, Evans replied smoothly, climbing down from the carriage. His city suit looked incongruous against the rugged ranch backdrop, one that could solve your current difficulties. Eleanor appeared in the doorway behind Thomas, instantly alert to the veiled threat in Evans' words. Perhaps we could discuss this inside, she suggested, maintaining the decorum her mother had instilled, despite her instinctive dislike of both men. Once seated in the parlor, Evans wasted no time on pleasantries. I understand the bank has called in your note, Holloway. 90 days is an ambitious timeline to raise such a substantial sum. Thomas's jaw tightened. Our finances are private business. Evans smiled, the expression not reaching his calculating eyes. Banking is my business, Mr. Holloway, and Montana's development is my particular interest at present. He leaned forward. I represent investors eager to establish a significant presence in this territory before the inevitable population boom. Get to the point, Thomas said flatly. Miller interjected, his weathered face creased with poorly concealed satisfaction. The point is, Holloway, we're prepared to purchase your ranch at a fair price that would settle your bank debt and leave something for a fresh start elsewhere. The audacity of the offer left Eleanor momentarily speechless. Thomas, however, responded with cold precision. The Holloway Ranch is not for sale, he stated. To you or anyone else. Evans sighed, as if disappointed by an unreasonable child. Pride is an expensive luxury, Mr. Holloway, especially when facing foreclosure. He withdrew papers from his breast pocket. Our offer would ensure you walk away with dignity and some capital. The alternative, well, forced sales rarely favor the seller. Eleanor found her voice. Mr. Evans, while we appreciate your concern, we have alternative plans for addressing our financial situation. Evans turned his assessing gaze on her, and Eleanor felt the familiar sensation of being measured and found wanting, a feeling she had known too often in Philadelphia society circles. Mrs. Holloway, he said with condescension barely masked as courtesy, ranching is a demanding business requiring significant capital and expertise. Your husband inherited both, yet still faces financial jeopardy. The implication hung in the air. What could she possibly contribute to their salvation? Before Eleanor could respond, Thomas stood. My wife is a full partner in all ranch decisions, Mr. Evans. Her judgment in business matters has proven exceptionally sound. His voice carried the steely edge Eleanor had first heard when he confronted Miller about the bull. Now, unless you have something to offer beyond attempting to profit from temporary setbacks, I believe our discussion is concluded. Miller rose, face flushed with anger. You're a fool, Holloway. This offer won't remain open indefinitely. Then consider it definitely declined, Thomas replied, showing them to the door with minimal courtesy. As the carriage departed, Eleanor joined Thomas on the porch. They orchestrated this, she said quietly. The fire, the accelerated loan terms, all to force us to sell. Thomas nodded grimly. And they'll try other tactics when this one fails. He turned to face her, concern evident in his expression. Eleanor, this fight could get ugly. Miller has influence in Pinecrest, and Evans has money and connections. They could make life difficult for us in ways we haven't anticipated." "I'm not afraid of difficult," Eleanor replied steadily. "I've faced worse than small-town politics and banking schemes." Thomas studied her face, as if committing every detail to memory. "When you stepped off that train, I had no idea what strength lay behind those green eyes." His voice softened. "I thank God every day for my good fortune." The warmth of his words sustained Eleanor through the challenging weeks that followed. True to Thomas's prediction, their adversaries employed various tactics to undermine them. Rumors circulated in Pinecrest about the ranch's imminent failure. Suppliers suddenly required cash payment rather than the credit traditionally extended to established operations. The local newspaper, influenced by Evans' advertising revenue, published an editorial about outdated family ranches giving way to modern agricultural enterprises. Most disturbing were the unexplained incidents at the ranch itself. Fences damaged in the night, a water trough contaminated with motor oil, tools disappearing from the barn. "They're trying to break us," Thomas said one evening after discovering 2 young calves missing from the north pasture. "Death by 1,000 cuts." Yet for every setback, they found unexpected support. Mrs. Bennet rallied the church sewing circle to patronize Eleanor's shop. Ezra Wilson and other neighboring ranchers shared resources and labor, recognizing that the threat to the Holloway Ranch could easily extend to their own lands if Evans' investment group gained a foothold. Even Jackson, normally taciturn, stepped forward with a solution when the general store abruptly cancelled their monthly supply order. "My cousin runs a mercantile in Helena," he told Eleanor. "He'll extend credit and deliver goods if we can gather enough orders to make the trip worthwhile." Eleanor seized the opportunity, organizing a cooperative purchasing agreement among friendly ranchers and townspeople. The arrangement not only secured necessary supplies, but also reduced costs through bulk ordering, a small but meaningful improvement to their financial position. Meanwhile, the dress shop flourished under Eleanor's management. Her willingness to adapt Eastern fashions to frontier practicality attracted customers from surrounding communities. When she added a line of sturdy yet attractive work clothes for men, even the mining camp 30 miles north began sending orders. "You've got a real gift," Mrs. Miller told her one afternoon, while being fitted for a new Sunday dress. "Nora Patterson ran this place for 15 years and never thought to expand beyond ladies' wear." Eleanor smiled, carefully pinning a sleeve. "Necessity breeds innovation, I suppose," Mrs. Miller nodded knowingly. "Town's talking about how you and Thomas are standing up to Miller and that city banker. Most folks are rooting for you despite what the newspaper prints." "Most folks?" The blacksmith's wife hesitated. "Meredith Evans has been influential with certain social circles, claims her cousin represents progress and prosperity for Pinecrest." She snorted derisively, as if that girl understands the meaning of either word. The mention of Meredith reminded Eleanor of the Independence Day celebration scheduled for the coming weekend, an event the entire community traditionally attended. Meredith had commissioned an elaborate gown for the occasion, one Eleanor had labored over, despite knowing it would likely bring no appreciation from its wearer. Thomas found her in the shop late that evening, putting final touches on the garment. "It's beautiful," he said, admiring the blue silk creation with its intricate pleating and delicate embroidery. "Though I doubt Meredith Evans deserves your best work." Eleanor smoothed the fabric thoughtfully. "Perhaps not, but I do." She glanced up at him. "My mother always said, never compromise your standards for clients who don't appreciate them. You're not working for their approval, you're working for your own satisfaction." Thomas's expression softened with understanding. "A philosophy that applies beyond dressmaking." He held out his hand. "Come home, Eleanor. You've done enough for today." The ride back to the ranch beneath a star-scattered sky provided a peaceful interlude in their otherwise turbulent lives. Thomas spoke of the young calves born that morning, the promising wheat emerging in the small experimental field they'd planted, the plans for rebuilding the burned section of fence. Ordinary concerns that somehow felt precious in the face of the uncertainty hanging over them. As they approached the ranch house, however, Thomas suddenly reined in his horse, signaling Eleanor to stop. "Something's wrong," he said quietly, nodding toward the darkened building. "The lamps should be lit. Mrs. Bennet always leaves at least the porch light burning." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Perhaps she forgot. Thomas shook his head, reaching for the rifle secured to his saddle. "Stay behind me," he instructed as they approached cautiously. The front door stood partially open, creaking softly in the breeze. Thomas entered first, rifle ready, motioning Eleanor to remain on the porch. Long minutes passed before he reappeared, his expression grim in the moonlight. "Someone's been through the house," he reported. "Drawers emptied, papers scattered. The strongbox is missing from my desk." Eleanor gasped. "Mrs. Bennet is fine. She left a note saying she was dining with her sister in town tonight." Thomas's jaw tightened. "They must have watched the house, waited until we were all away." "The strongbox," Eleanor repeated, mind racing. "Did it contain deeds, loan documents, cash reserves?" "Yes." Thomas ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Not enough to change our situation fundamentally, but its loss certainly doesn't help." Eleanor stepped past him into the ransacked parlor, surveying the destruction with growing anger. Books had been swept from shelves, cushions slashed, Thomas's mother's heirloom clock broken on the hearth. This was more than theft. It was a violation meant to intimidate as much as to damage. "We should notify the sheriff," she said, already, knowing Thomas's response. "Sheriff Davis owes his position to Herbert Miller's support during the last election." Thomas replied bitterly. "He'll file a report and do nothing. Might even suggest we stage the break-in ourselves for the insurance." "Money?" Eleanor began gathering scattered papers, mind working furiously. "What about the territorial marshal? He's not subject to local politics." "And stationed 100 miles away," Thomas pointed out. "By the time he investigated, any evidence would be long gone." He knelt beside her, helping to collect documents. "No, we're on our own with this, same as everything else." The following day brought another blow. While assessing what had been stolen, Thomas discovered that the water rights documentation for the creek was missing, papers critical for maintaining their agreement with the Wilson Ranch, and potentially valuable for leveraging similar arrangements with other neighbors. "Without those papers, we can't prove our claim predates others," he explained to Eleanor. "Anyone could challenge our usage rights if they filed new paperwork with the land office." "Could we file replacement documents?" Thomas shook his head. "Not without the original claim numbers and survey coordinates, details contained in the stolen papers." His expression darkened. This wasn't random theft. Someone knew exactly what to take to cause maximum damage. The Independence Day celebration arrived amid this turmoil. Thomas suggested they skip the event, but Eleanor insisted they attend. "Hiding away would signal weakness," she argued as she pinned up her hair. "Besides, the entire community will be there, including Maxwell Evans. It's an opportunity to observe their next moves." Thomas reluctantly agreed, and they joined the gathering in Pinecrest's central square. Flags and bunting adorned the buildings, tables overflowed with food, and a platform had been erected for speeches and musical performances. Eleanor wore a simple blue dress that nonetheless flattered her figure, refusing to be ashamed of her size despite the whispers that still occasionally followed her. Thomas, handsome in his good suit, kept her hand firmly in his as they greeted neighbors and friends. "The Holloways," Mayor Thompson boomed, approaching with an outstretched hand. "Glad you could join us today." Eleanor noted Maxwell Evans hovering nearby, his tailored suit making him conspicuous among the more practically dressed ranchers and townspeople. Meredith stood at his elbow in the blue silk gown Eleanor had created, looking undeniably beautiful, but wearing an expression of perpetual dissatisfaction. "Wouldn't miss it," Thomas replied, shaking the mayor's hand with appropriate vigor. "Pinecrest knows how to celebrate properly." "Indeed we do," Mayor Thompson agreed heartily. "Speaking of celebration, I understand congratulations may soon be in order." He glanced meaningfully toward Evans and Meredith. "A prominent union that could bring significant investment to our community." Eleanor felt Thomas stiffen beside her, even as she processed the mayor's implication. Meredith and Maxwell, engaged or soon to be, the alliance made strategic sense. Meredith's father owned the general store and considerable town property, while Evans had banking connections and Eastern capital. "How fortunate for Pinecrest," Thomas managed with admirable restraint. Evans chose that moment to approach Meredith on his arm. "Holloway, Mrs. Holloway," he greeted smoothly, "enjoying the festivities?" "Immensely," Eleanor replied before Thomas could speak. She turned to Meredith with genuine professional pride. "The gown suits you perfectly, Miss Evans. The color complements your complexion beautifully." Meredith's expression flickered with grudging acknowledgement. "Your workmanship is adequate," she conceded. "Though the sleeves are perhaps too full for current Boston fashion, Montana requires practical adaptations," Eleanor responded pleasantly. "One must be able to move freely for frontier living." Evans watched this exchange with calculating eyes. "Speaking of adaptations, Holloway, I wonder if recent events have prompted reconsideration of our offer. I understand there was some unfortunate disruption at your ranch." The transparent confirmation of his involvement in the break-in nearly shattered Thomas's composure. Eleanor squeezed his hand in warning. "If anything," Thomas replied with remarkable control, "recent events have strengthened our commitment to the ranch. The Holloway legacy isn't easily surrendered, especially to those who employ dishonorable tactics." Evans's smile tightened. "Business often requires decisive action, Mr. Holloway. Those unwilling to adapt inevitably find themselves displaced by progress." He glanced toward the bank building across the square. "I understand Mr. Whitley has been reviewing collateral valuations. Concerning developments, I hear." The veiled threat hung in the air between them. Before Thomas could respond, a commotion near the speaker's platform drew their attention. Town officials were gathering, and Mayor Thompson excused himself to join them. "I believe announcements are about to begin," Evans observed smoothly, "including, perhaps, news of certain property transfers that might interest you." With a final, pointed look, he guided Meredith away, leaving Thomas and Eleanor to exchange troubled glances. "Property transfers?" Eleanor repeated quietly. "What could he mean?" Thomas's expression darkened. "I don't know, but nothing good comes from that man's schemes." They made their way closer to the platform where Mayor Thompson now stood, preparing to address the crowd. Eleanor scanned the gathering, noting the mix of excitement and curiosity on most faces, and the smug anticipation on Herbert Miller's weathered features as he positioned himself prominently near the front. "Something's happening," she murmured, to Thomas. "Something we don't know about yet." His arm tightened around her waist. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." The simple affirmation steadied her as Mayor Thompson raised his hands for silence. Whatever announcement awaited, whatever new challenge Miller and Evans had orchestrated, they would confront it as they had every obstacle since Eleanor stepped off that train months ago, with courage, determination, and the unexpected strength they had found in each other. Mayor Thompson cleared his throat as the crowd settled. "Citizens of Pinecrest, we gather today not only to celebrate our nation's independence, but also to announce exciting developments for our community's future." Eleanor felt Thomas tense beside her as Maxwell Evans stepped onto the platform. Meredith, and her father flanking him with triumphant expressions. "It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Maxwell Evans," the mayor continued, "who brings tremendous opportunity to our humble town. Mr. Evans." Evans took center stage with practiced confidence. "Thank you, Mayor Thompson. As many of you know, I represent Eastern investors eager to develop Montana's abundant resources. Today, I'm pleased to announce the formation of the Pinecrest Development Company." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Evans outlined his vision. A modernized town center, expanded rail connections, new businesses to process local resources. Each element sounded promising until he reached the heart of his announcement. Central to this vision is the consolidation of water resources for maximum efficiency. I'm proud to announce our acquisition of controlling water rights to Wolf Creek, the lifeblood of this region. Thomas stepped forward involuntarily. "That's impossible," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "The Holloway Ranch holds primary water rights to Wolf Creek." Evans smiled with cold satisfaction. "Perhaps you should examine your documentation more carefully, Mr. Holloway. Official records now show those rights transferred to the Pinecrest Development Company." A shock of understanding hit Eleanor. The stolen papers, the missing strongbox, this had been their purpose all along, not just theft, but facilitating fraud. "Those rights were never for sale," Thomas declared, his voice carrying across the now hushed gathering. "Any transfer documents are forgeries," Herbert Miller pushed forward. "Are you accusing respected businessmen of criminal activity, Holloway?" Bold claims from a man facing foreclosure. The public revelation of their financial troubles sent another ripple through the crowd. Eleanor saw confusion and concern on the faces of their friends, calculating interest on others. Evans raised placating hands. "We needn't air private disputes during community celebrations. The land office has already processed and approved the transfers. Any objections should be directed through proper legal channels." The smooth dismissal was calculated to make Thomas appear unreasonable. Eleanor watched their neighbors' expressions shift, uncertainty replacing initial outrage. Evans was winning the public narrative, but something caught Eleanor's attention, a figure at the edge of the crowd. Mrs. Bennet stood with an elderly man Eleanor didn't recognize, both watching the confrontation intently. Mayor Thompson attempted to regain control. "Let's continue with our planned festivities. The territorial judge will now lead us in, if I might interrupt." The new voice came from the elderly stranger, who now approached the platform with surprising authority despite his aged appearance. The crowd parted instinctively. "Judge Harrison," the mayor stammered, "we weren't expecting you until tomorrow's circuit court session." Eleanor glanced at Thomas, whose expression had shifted from anger to cautious interest. The elderly man, apparently, the traveling circuit judge, ascended the platform with deliberate steps. Fortuitous timing, it seems. I couldn't help overhearing discussion of water rights transfers. Evans's confidence visibly wavered. "A simple business transaction, Your Honor, all properly documented." Judge Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "Documentation is indeed essential in matters of property." He turned toward Mrs. Bennet, who now approached carrying a familiar wooden box. "Which is why I found this lady's visit to my chambers this morning most intriguing." Mrs. Bennet handed the strongbox to Thomas with a triumphant smile. "Found this hidden in Miller's shed when I went to borrow his handwagon yesterday. Thought the judge might want to see what's inside before it disappeared again." Thomas opened the box with trembling hands, extracting a sealed envelope. "The original water rights documentation," he confirmed. "Untampered and with my father's signature intact." Judge Harrison examined the papers carefully. "These appear legitimate. Most curious that the land office would process transfers without originals." He fixed Evans with a penetrating stare. "Especially given recent reports of irregularities in several Montana land offices, irregularities involving Eastern banking." Representatives paying clerks to process fraudulent claims. Evans's complexion paled beneath his carefully cultivated tan. Meredith stepped away from him slightly, her expression shifting from triumph to uncertainty. "Mere coincidence, Your Honor," Evans insisted. "I've operated with complete transparency." "Then you'll welcome a full investigation," the judge replied evenly, "including examination of recent bank activities, property transactions, and certain nighttime disturbances at the Holloway Ranch." Eleanor watched as Herbert Miller attempted to slip away through the crowd, only to find his path blocked by Jackson and several other ranch hands who had positioned themselves strategically around the gathering. "Furthermore," Judge Harrison continued, "I've received sworn statements from clerks at the Helena Land Office regarding bribes paid for expedited processing of suspicious documents." He held up a folder. "Documents bearing signatures that appear remarkably similar to those on your development company's incorporation papers, Mr. Evans." The crowd's mood shifted palpably as the implications became clear. Neighbors who had moments ago regarded Thomas with pity now directed their ire toward Evans and Miller. Evans's composure finally cracked. "This is absurd. You have no jurisdiction." Federal land fraud falls precisely within my jurisdiction," Judge Harrison interrupted coldly, "as does conspiracy, theft, and tampering with legal documents." What followed unfolded with surprising swiftness. The sheriff, previously so aligned with Miller's interests, found himself unable to ignore direct judicial orders. Evans and Miller were detained pending formal charges, their protests fading beneath the community's growing outrage. Through it all, Eleanor stood beside Thomas, her hand firmly in his. When the initial commotion subsided, she turned to Mrs. Bennett. "How did you know to take the strongbox to the judge?" The housekeeper's eyes twinkled. "Been working for the Holloways for 20 years. Think I don't recognize Miller's shuffle when I see footprints by the shed? Found the box while borrowing his wagon without permission." She nodded toward Judge Harrison. "Old Harrison was a friend of Thomas's father. Figured he'd want to know what Miller and that city slicker were up to before holding court tomorrow." Thomas embraced the older woman impulsively. "Mrs. Bennett, you may have saved the ranch." "Nonsense," she replied, though her pleased expression belied her dismissive words. "Just did what needed doing. Same as Eleanor's been doing since she arrived." The Independence Day celebrations resumed, transformed from potential disaster to genuine jubilation for the Holloways. As dusk fell and lanterns illuminated the town square for dancing, Eleanor found herself surrounded by women who had once whispered behind their hands at her size. "Your dress shop saved my John's best shirt," Mrs. Wilson confided. "Never seen mending so fine, you can't tell it was torn." "And those children's clothes you made for the Peterson twins," another added. "Practical enough for play, but still suitable. For Sunday services, clever design." Eleanor accepted their praise graciously, aware of the deeper message beneath their words. She had proven herself not through conforming to their expectations, but by contributing genuine value to the community. As the band struck up a waltz, Thomas appeared at her side. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Holloway?" Eleanor smiled up at her. Husband, this man who had welcomed her into his life despite initial doubts, who had seen beyond her appearance to the woman beneath. "Always," she replied softly. They moved across the makeshift dance floor with surprising grace, Thomas leading confidently while accommodating her fuller figure with natural ease. Several couples stepped back to watch, their expressions reflecting not mockery, but admiration for the obvious affection between the rancher and his bride. "We still have challenges ahead," Thomas murmured as they danced. "The bank loan, rebuilding after the fire. But we'll face them together," Eleanor completed. his thought. And we have friends we didn't know we had. Thomas's arms tightened around her. When I sent that letter east, I thought I was seeking a practical partnership. I never imagined... Finding love? Eleanor supplied when he hesitated. Finding you, he corrected, his voice rough with emotion. The perfect woman who was never in the photograph, but always in the letters. As the music swelled around them, Thomas drew her into a kiss that left no doubt of his feelings, a public declaration more powerful than any words could express. The same community that had once whispered cruel comments now responded with cheers and applause. Later that night, as they drove home beneath star-scattered skies, Eleanor rested her head on Thomas's shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible when she first stepped from that train. "I've been thinking," Thomas said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence, "about expanding the vegetable garden into a proper farm plot. With your business sense and my ranching experience, we could diversify, be less vulnerable to the whims of cattle markets or unscrupulous bankers." Eleanor smiled at his use of we and our, the casual acknowledgement of their true partnership. "I think that's an excellent idea. I've noticed the southwest field gets wonderful morning light." "Exactly what I was thinking," Thomas agreed, his voice warming with enthusiasm. "We could start with hardy crops this season, expand gradually." As the ranch house came into view, lantern light glowing welcomingly from windows Mrs. Bennet had insisted on illuminating in their absence, Eleanor felt a profound sense of homecoming, not just to a physical place, but to herself, to the woman she was always meant to be, once freed from society's narrow judgment. "Thank you," she said softly. Thomas glanced down at her. "For what?" "For seeing me," Eleanor replied simply. "The real me." Thomas reined the horses to a stop before their home and turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Eleanor Holloway, you are the best thing that ever happened to this ranch. And to me. Don't ever forget that." As they walked hand in hand toward their future, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a home or a husband, but her place in the world, a place where her worth was measured not by the size of her body, but by the capacity of her heart, the strength of her character, and the depth of her love. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.